Jax's path to sobriety was not a straight line. It was filled with emotional landmines, unexpected triggers, and the daunting task of unlearning patterns that had become deeply woven into his identity over more than a decade. For years, his public persona thrived on the volatile cocktail of reality television drama, much of it fueled by alcohol, ego, and the pressure to keep up an image. But behind the curated chaos was a man wrestling with far more complicated truths: self-doubt, suppressed anger, and the long shadow of unresolved trauma. He has spoken candidly in recent years about the emotional weight he carried into adulthood, including the devastating loss of his father in 2017. That loss didn't just hurt, it destabilized him. Instead of confronting his grief, he drowned it in distraction, parties, nightlife, meaningless conflicts, and self-destructive behavior that created a temporary smokescreen over the real pain. It was a pattern, emotional avoidance masked by surface-level stimulation, and it worked until it didn't. The birth of his son Cruz became the mirror he couldn't avoid. In an instant, there was no more room to run. Every choice Jax made now had a ripple effect, touching not just his own life, but that of an innocent, impressionable child. The clarity of that realization was more sobering than any intervention. He remembers those early moments of fatherhood with surprising tenderness. The bleary-eyed 3 a.m. feedings, the tiny hands grasping his finger, the way Cruz's face would light up with a gummy smile that melted away every ounce of ego. Those moments became his anchor. They exposed the cracks in the way he had been living and illuminated what needed to change. He began to view the world through his son's eyes and realized that if he didn't confront his demons, those same cracks might one day become the fractures in Cruz's foundation too. Determined to change the narrative, Jax made the difficult but necessary decision to get help. Therapy wasn't just a suggestion. It became a lifeline. He began to confront the uncomfortable truths he had been sidestepping for most of his adult life. In those therapy sessions, he peeled back the layers of his addiction and began to see the origins of his behavior not as flaws, but as coping mechanisms born from unresolved wounds. He discovered how childhood experiences, suppressed grief, and a long-standing tolerance for chaos had shaped his reactions. He came to understand that sobriety wasn't an event. It was a practice. There were days when the temptation to drink was loud, almost deafening, but he learned to sit with the discomfort, to lean into his new coping tools: journaling, breathwork, mindfulness, and frequent check-ins with a support network he trusted. Structure became his ally. He built daily routines centered around family: morning walks with Cruz, cooking dinner with Brittany, winding down the day without screens or distractions. These seemingly mundane rituals became the scaffolding of his new life, helping him form a different relationship with time and presence. More than anything, Jax began to see sobriety not as a loss of freedom, but as a reclamation of it. He didn't want to be the dad who was there but disconnected, who showed up physically, but not emotionally. He wanted Cruz to remember him as someone dependable, someone calm, someone real. As Jax and Brittany entered the uncharted territory of developmental assessments for Cruz, their emotional landscape shifted once again. At first, there was sorrow, the quiet grief for the expectations they had once envisioned. Then came the anxiety. What would Cruz's future look like? Would he struggle to connect, to be understood? But as they listened, researched, and learned, those emotions made space for something else: relief. Relief in having a clearer picture. Relief in finding a community. Relief in knowing that while the journey would be different, they didn't have to walk it alone. The diagnosis didn't define Cruz. It clarified what he needed and gave his parents a roadmap. The early days were an overwhelming blur of new terms, acronyms, and medical appointments. They found themselves quickly immersed in a world that operated on entirely different rules, one where progress was measured not in milestones but in subtleties. A glance, a new word, a spontaneous hug. Jax and Brittany adapted with urgency and grace. Their home became a sanctuary for Cruz, outfitted with visual aids to assist with communication, sensory-friendly nooks designed for decompression, and a daily rhythm that offered both structure and flexibility. Every achievement, no matter how small, was celebrated with genuine joy. For Jax, these victories began to reshape his understanding of fatherhood. It was no longer about perfection or comparison. It was about connection and growth on Cruz's timeline. Jax began attending therapy sessions with Cruz, not as a passive observer, but as a fully engaged partner in his son's journey. He asked questions. He took notes. He practiced strategies at home. He spoke publicly about how much he had learned from educators and therapists, a group he now considers not just helpers, but heroes. Watching Cruz engage with the world in his own way softened Jax in ways he never anticipated. He learned to slow down, to find beauty in repetition, and to listen more closely, to Cruz and to himself. Rather than feeling burdened by the demands of raising a neurodivergent child, he found himself elevated by the responsibility. He discovered that love isn't about molding someone into your image, but about meeting them exactly where they are and celebrating what makes them different. His admiration for Cruz is boundless. He often calls him magnetic, noting that there's a unique magic in the way Cruz experiences the world, a kind of perspective that forces everyone around him to re-examine their own definitions of normal, success, and happiness. In private, the evolution of Jax and Brittany's relationship has mirrored the growth they've experienced as individuals. What was once a volatile romance made for television has slowly transformed into a partnership forged in the quiet moments of real life. They've learned to speak with more tenderness, to listen with more patience. Jax is quick to acknowledge how much Brittany has been his constant, his mirror when he didn't like what he saw, and his guide when he was too lost to see the way. He credits her with helping him stay grounded, saying that she never treated him like a project, but always made him feel worth the effort. In return, Brittany sees a man who has evolved, not just in behavior, but in heart. The brashness that once defined Jax has given way to presence. The man who once sought attention now seeks meaning. Even their disagreements have matured. They no longer erupt in defensiveness, but unfold in reflection. Friends and family say the change in Jax is profound, even jarring at times. There's a quietness about him now, not of resignation, but of resolution. His energy is no longer scattered, it's rooted. Sobriety remains a daily commitment, and there are still moments of temptation, fatigue, and longing for a life that once felt easier, if more chaotic. But the difference now is that Jax has a toolkit and a tribe. He leans into physical activity, ongoing therapy, and conversations with other dads navigating similar journeys. And through it all, he holds tight to the belief that progress is worth more than perfection. Cruz's diagnosis has not only reshaped Jax's parenting, it's reshaped his purpose. He's seriously considering launching a podcast or documentary that invites honest conversations about sobriety, fatherhood, mental health, and the beauty of neurodiversity. Not for attention, but for connection. He wants to be part of the conversation that helps normalize the uncomfortable and give voice to those who often feel unseen. In Cruz, Jax sees strength and clarity. In Brittany, he sees enduring love. And in himself, finally, he sees someone worth fighting for. Not the version the cameras captured, but the man becoming who he was always meant to be. Each morning, as Cruz runs toward him with unfiltered joy, Jax is reminded why he keeps going. He's not chasing fame anymore. He's chasing presence, peace, and the pride of being the kind of father his son can look up to. Not for what he does, but for who he is.